Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence Alert. Today is Saturday, May 2nd, 2020. This is a weekly market update. So I want to start this week to talk about, again, the unintended consequences of shutting down the economy like we have. And I think there's not enough attention paid to that. And it kind of reminded me of a couple examples or a couple things. And what I've seen this week in the news, and I've been thinking a lot about agriculture and the food supply as it relates to what I think is a midterm to long-term trend, which is our deteriorating weather and growing conditions that are going to happen because of a decreased solar activity coupled with other cycles that are going to create weather volatility. Please see my recent video interview with Sean Hackett of Hackett Financial Advisors. We did an interview and talked about the solar cycles and diminished solar activity and the expectation that we'd be entering into a solar minimum and that agriculture would be affected negatively as it has been in prior periods. But what I'm talking about is a short-term consequence that's been caused by government fiat and government decisions. Because we've shut everything down, we've really, without really thinking through all the consequences, because we're panicking over the COVID virus, we haven't anticipated the second-order effects. Policymakers haven't, and supply chains are set up for our economy before we shut down. You know, a lot of people were taking their meals at restaurants, not in their home, whatever, and so you had this commercial and institutional food supply, and a lot of the food delivery chains were set up for that. And there's a lot of intricacies that go into that, and it's like a fine-oiled machine. And you know, it's not like you watching some show where some top chef guy goes or gal goes with a little basket under her arm and smells the tomatoes at the farmer's market and places them in her basket. Now, stuff's coming on a truck and on a cycle. And if you take away all that demand, it backs up the chain all the way back to the farms. And whether people want to acknowledge this or not, in order to feed the people we do with the prices that we do, we have factory farming that goes on in animal husbandry. It's not, as I saw Sebastian Maniscalco, the comedian, talking about Whole Foods, people that come to the chicken counter and how they act, do the chickens plate together well and all this stuff. So it's not like that. It's not, it's done in very large numbers, cramped quarters, just-in-time inventory. That's how everything's on an assembly line. So we've backed that up. And so we have is a situation now developing on a lot of farms and a lot of ranches where, for example, you have a cycle for hogs. They are brought in as piglets. They are fed. They are cared for. They are brought to a certain weight over a certain time period, and then they are moved on to processing or the slaughterhouse, let's be blunt. And then another group of young hogs comes in and they raise them up. Rinse and repeat. That's how you get your bacon. That's how you get your ham. That's how you get your pork chops. And what we've had is, because of the spread of the flu through a lot of the processing plants, they've been forced to shut down. They can't take the animals, and this is cycles being interrupted. So we're having situations. This is going to be very ugly to think about, but farmers are having to destroy herds. They're having to give injections to sows to have them forced abortions. They're turning up the heat in chicken houses so that the flocks of chickens, laying hens, die of dehydration. And this is causing a lot of issues. It's going to cause issues. It's going to cause food price inflation. And this is you can read some articles. I'll attach an article. But it's another thing to consider. It's putting people out of business. It's, one farmer was on BNN up in Canada, and he was talking about, the whole reason that these animals are here on Earth, they provide sustenance, and he's had to cull his entire herd, and the whole point of the business is ruined, and all because the government has decided they're going to shut everybody in. And I think this is a classic case. This is an educational point of view that I want to get across. It reminded me of Fredric Bastiat's broken window fallacy, or that which is seen, the effects, and that which is not seen. And I'm going to put a link to it. And these are things that people need to think about, because most people think emotionally and they react. If you shut the economy down without thinking about what you're doing, you don't consider what the second order effects are and third order effects, then you see, well, we're going to stop people from dying a certain amount, or they think they are. But you don't see all the second order effects. You don't see how you back up the food chain, how everything is set up for the society to run a certain way, and then you interrupt it by government fiat, and the devastation that it causes to people's livelihoods and to people's, ability to possibly eat. There was a editorial, I'm going to put a link to it, by I believe it was the CEO of Tyson Foods. He said, we're going to have a food problem in this country if we don't get these processing plants back up and running, and get this food moving through the economy. And people aren't thinking about this stuff. And it's, like I said, it's the classic broken window fallacy. The people, the kids throw a rock through a business cobbler's window, and then the glazier comes and replaces the glasses and is paid for that. Well, that's an economic benefit that the people staying around think that produces, which it does. The glass has to be replaced. But the money that was used to replace the broken glass could have been used for something else. And the thinking of the broken glass fallacy is, well, if there was an economic benefit to accidentally breaking the glass, why don't we break all the glass in town, and then we can create even more economic benefit? And so what I'm trying to get you to think about a little bit here is, you see the thing in front of you, but you don't consider what you don't see. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about the current situation with the food supply. Now, we're not going to run out of food. I don't say that's going to happen. But what I am saying is that prices are going to go up. And there are, 30 million people unemployed right now. There are multiple people that you can see. You can do a Google search for images and look for food bank lines. If you're a white collar worker, or if you're somebody that's fortunate to still be working, blessed to be working like myself, you don't have to worry about it. Food prices go up 10%, okay, 20%. Hey, okay, you're not going to like it, but you'll deal with it. But if you're on the margin already, now what are you going to do? And the reason I bring this up, I want to get into something, and some people aren't going to like it. It's controversial. This might even affect this video. I don't know. There was a video that was taken down by YouTube last week. And it was of two doctors out in California that run a practice. And they had some very controversial things to say about the WuFlu and about opening businesses. And that when they looked at the statistics and they presented them, that this thing's really not as bad, much more worse than influenza. And they had the journalists peppering them with questions. And they did a good job. And I'm going to put a link to it, because even though YouTube took it down, it still exists on the internet. And you should watch it. And you should think about it dispassionately. Because what the one doctor said, they've tested 5,200 people in Kern County. That's where they're at, their practice. They have multiple emergency rooms, or they're emergency room doctors. I think they have current acute care facilities. I don't know the exact thing, but the death rate of the coronavirus is similar to the prevalence to the flu. That's what they're basically saying. And this is a complete overreaction. Now, they don't say that to point the blame at the government and say, what they're saying is that when this thing started, we had incomplete data. We had models. We had suppositions, we had hypotheses. Now we have actual data, and the data shows what a lot of us thought this was originally, that it was just another form of upper respiratory tract infection like the flu, similar to the flu. And now the data is starting to support that. And they go through this for multiple countries. They go through it for New York City. They explain that. They go through the difference between what the country of Sweden and Norway, where Sweden opened up their economy was never really fully shut down, and Norway's was. And the difference is not that much. And you'd be surprised, just based on the extrapolations and the amount of data that we now have, that we've had, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the population has already had coronavirus. So why did YouTube take this down? Why? And they, the reporters were peppering with questions, were saying, well, the government, Dr. Fauci, and all these people, do you think you're smarter than them? Were they wrong? And they go to great pains to say, we're not criticizing them. We're saying that they're academics, they're in ivory towers. We're emergency room doctors. We're in the weeds. We're seeing this in real time. We're doing testing. Our clinics do the testing. We're seeing the data. This is the data. It's like John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my views. What do you do, sir? The facts have changed. The data is now clear. This is no different than the flu. People die, and they explain it very poignantly when they say, these two doctors, that when we're confronted in the medical community with a new disease, it creates fear, it creates uncertainty because we don't have any data. And we didn't have any data a few months ago, so it was probably appropriate to shut things down. But they also go into what I've been talking about for the last couple weeks, which is the knock-on effects of locking everybody up in their house. The increases in spousal abuse they're seeing, the increases in child molestation that they're seeing, the increases in substance abuse that they're seeing, the increases in general depression and suicide that they're seeing. These are all things that I've been talking about, the knock-on effects, many of which will be greater number and longer lasting of effect for these individuals that are incurring it. If a child is beaten or molested, that's something that's going to affect that person for the rest of their life. If a woman shows up at an emergency room with a black eye because her husband punched her in the head, that's going to affect her for a long time. If somebody blows their brains out because they feel despondent because they've lost their job and they don't see any path forward, that affects everybody around them for the rest of their lives. So it's very important that we make decisions based on facts. And when the facts change, we have to show leadership. We have to show humility. We have to show that we are willing to change and adapt ourselves to the new facts. And I think that a lot of times people in government or in, I don't want to say leadership, but in positions of authority, let's put it that way, because my views on a lot of these so-called leaders, they're not willing to change their views. They don't want to reverse their decisions. They don't want to be seen as wrong. And unfortunately, there are people in government that don't want a crisis to go to waste. They seek more power. They seek more funding for their agency. If you don't think this goes on, then you're just being naive. I'm not saying in all cases, but I think that people don't want to admit they're wrong. That's not just in government, that's in everyday life. So I think it was very important what these doctors had to say in the conversation, that as the data comes out and as the numbers of tested people go up, is what I thought was going to happen also. And I got lambasted for this in the comments and emails that were sent to me and all kinds of things, communications that, hey, I just was quiet because it goes back to what I've been told before. People will forgive you for being wrong. They'll never forgive you for being right. And we have inflicted a depression on ourselves and the world, which we don't know the final outcome of. We don't know all the knock-on effects. I was listening to David Rosenberg on a podcast this week, and he said that there's going to be an output gap. Now it's going to take years. Yes, you're not going to have a V shape. But you had, I think this last quarter, the first quarter, they reported the economy was down around close to 5%, 4 point something percent. But the second quarter, which is the main quarter that had the majority of this shutdown, could be anywhere to 30 or 40% decline in economic activity. United Airlines said the other day their business is down 100%. There is no business for the United Airlines. It's not going to go back to normal in a month. So you're going to have years where this is going to take to recover from. And we're affecting the food supply. We're affecting people's lives in other ways that aren't even considered. And YouTube thought that this was to take these guys' press conference. It had 5.4 million views and take it down. I want to know why. I want to know why in a country we can't have differing views. It's like the one guy said, he didn't want to get in, the one doctor said, he didn't want to get into the whys of this is. I'll get into it because there's people out there that want power. There's people that want the economy subverted as a way to get power, to get a change in the political parties that are in power now. If you don't think that, you're naive. That's not the primary driver, but all these things come into play. And there's people that were wrong or based on their hypothesis. And then we had the media gin this thing up so badly with fear. I mean, there's people that are scared to go out of their house. I talked about John Economides. I think that's his name. He's a professor of statistics, specifically studies epidemics at Stanford University. I'll put a link to his video. He talks about this from a math perspective. He's done the work. He's not some guy on the internet. He's a renowned statistician, professor at Stanford University. He said your chances of dying of coronavirus are the same as driving to work every day. Your chances of dying of coronavirus are the same as an over-the-road trucker's chance of dying. If you're over 65, let me rephrase that. Your chances of dying if you're over 65 of coronavirus are the same as if you were the over-the-road trucker. And there's millions of guys that drive trucks. We rely on them. We don't shut the trucking industry down. But people get in accidents and die. How did we get like this? How did this happen? Who is responsible? Now, here in Texas, we've opened the economy up. We're slowly opening it up. I've been at work all day. My wife has been at stores. Things have seemed to be opening up. But how is this going? It's not going to be a V-shaped recovery. And what are the knock-on effects now? We don't know. Dr. Erickson in this video talks about, the more you isolate yourself as a healthy person, your immune system is actually going to be compromised. He talks about, a kid, we make fun of a kid crawling around in the dirt, eating dirt and stuff. That's what you need to do, this flora of bacteria and viruses that you're exposed to. When a baby is first born, it's in this protective womb of its mother. It's isolated. It's in a sterile environment, if you will, for the most part. It's born, and it immediately starts being exposed to the flora of bacteria and viruses. That's why when a baby comes in to the emergency room that's 3 months old and has a high fever, they take it very seriously. They give it, all kinds of tests. You go in there as a 30-year-old and with a sniffly nose and a fever, they tell you to go home, take aspirin, and drink Gatorade. It'll resolve. Because you have an immune system. The baby doesn't. I mean, everything these guys said in the video made sense to me. People, they talk. The other doctor, I can't pronounce his name, Massey or something like that. But anyways, he said, when people had leprosy in ancient times, they didn't isolate all the healthy people. They isolated the people with leprosy. It's the same thing. If we're doing testing and tracking, it's just like if you have the regular flu, you're asked not to come into the office and spread it to everyone else. So I'll leave it up to the listener. You can hit me up in the comments. I'd like to hear your opinion. Why did we do this? I don't think it's a nefarious plot. I just think that, it was a new form of upper respiratory tract or lower respiratory tract disease, similar to the flu, and people didn't have enough data. They didn't have enough information, so they reacted appropriately. But now we have data, and the data shows that, depending where you are, if you're riding the subway every day in New York, that's a little bit different than me living down in South Texas in a semi-rural environment where I'm not coming in that many. I'm in a car or my truck going back and forth to work by myself every day with very limited interaction with a small group of people. But still, even with that, you still are similar to the flu. So the facts have changed. It's time to go back to work. It's time to try to salvage as much of this as we can and get things back to normal as we can. That's my point. I'll put a link to the video that I found, a link to it. Like I said, YouTube saw fit to take it down. I hope they don't ding my video now, but we'll see. If they do, they do. They'll put it on BitChute, I guess. I want to talk about the uranium market because this has finally woke up. I believe the uranium bull market has now had sufficient catalyst to light a fire. This is a chart that Brandon Monroe put up recently in a presentation he did. And he's just showing recent uranium sector announcements. I mean, not even going back like to the mid-March, just talking about the mine shutdowns because of the WuFlu and the subsequent rise in uranium prices. Now, in the Cameco first quarter conference call, they kind of talk about the supply disruptions that have happened now. This is the first quarter conference call comments I wanted to go over. There's been quite a few people on the Twitter sphere that are a lot smarter than me that have reviewed this, but I just want to go over what some of the things I heard on the conference call and that I thought were important, to my mind at least. And I like how Cameco keeps continuing to talk about value. And they say, where does that added value come from? It comes from preserving our Tier 1 assets. They have said over and over, they are not going to sell uranium from Cigar Lake and McArthur River at the $20 for cheap money. They're not going to do it. Not when there was sufficient inventory and sufficient oversupply in the spot market or in other areas that they could buy and sell into their or fulfill their contracts. And I agree with that. So they go on to say, this is a mixture of the CEO and CF, different guys talking, COO, I think. But they say, as prices rise, we believe that sets up the conditions necessary to allow us to layer in new long-term contracts at prices that recognize the value of our Tier 1 assets. That's how we create value. They've been saying that. I agree. You've heard us say before that historically in our market, willingness to sell or the mobility of material tends to be inversely related to the price. And when the price goes up, we see folks less willing to part with material. And that's what they're seeing. You also heard us say that throughout 2019 that we were not finding a very deep market when it came to pounds that were in a can or in a canister and available today. So they've been saying that for a while. They don't think that the spot market's really as deep as it is. I encourage you to listen to the call or read the transcript. It's on Seeking Alpha. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But they get into a lot more detail about how they don't really think that the spot market's that deep, and that a lot of the activities between traders moving the same material back and forth, and that, with these shutdowns now, are we really starting to see that now? I said all along, I thought when they shut put Cigar Lake on care and maintenance and then extended it because of the WuFlu, the 4-week shutdown at Cigar Lake, and then they announced that they were putting it on care and maintenance for an indeterminate amount of time. I mean, that was to preserve this value, and the excuse originally was WuFlu. I get it, but why open it back up now? They go on to say, I'm not so sure you can be, I think he's talking about fuel buyers here, you can be comforted that 3 months, 6 months, 9 months out that supply is going to be there for you given the unplanned supply disruption that's happening now. You know, we had unplanned supply disruptions in the past. That's what kicked off the last bull market in uranium. You know, when Cigar Lake flooded in 2006, McArthur River flooded in 2003. That took substantial amounts of supply offline and helped kickstart the last bull market. You know, they go on to say, we always said that this market we felt was becoming very vulnerable to an unplanned supply disruption, and now we have it. We were already cutting back. Low prices were curing low prices. Supply was continually being cut back for the last couple years, few years actually, as more and more mines were shut down or put on care and maintenance. And now we've had this additional supply disruption where Cameco basically is not mining anything anymore, and Kazatomprom is also reeling in their supply or their mining. One slide I wanted to show from the presentation. Production for Cameco is less than their deliveries, so they have to go to other areas, take inventories down additionally possibly, but they're down substantially already. They can borrow from customers that haven't, that's a possibility. They can go into the spot market, or prices can rise sufficiently to incentivize Cameco management to restart their mines. Ultimately, I think that's what happens. We all think that's what's going to happen. So I encourage you to listen to it. Do I think we're in the uranium bull market has started? Yes, I do. Do I think it goes directly up? No, it's a 3-year deal. 3 to, a couple few years it's going to take. It's not going to just go, and I don't know how high it goes. I think it goes a lot higher than people think. Why? And I've said this before, because we keep building more reactors, and I keep going to the World Nuclear News site and the WNA site, and I keep seeing, every couple of weeks another reactor being put online or being considered or having it concrete being poured or whatever the milestone is that you can see with 50 some odd reactors under construction, but I don't see any announcements of any new mines being built or even being considered to be built. And now we're going on, damn near a decade. Where is the new supply? But yet we continue to burn pounds in new reactors every year. So I would suggest to you that when you have a sustained market of low prices like we've had, that you have a tendency to overshoot on the upside simply because the timeliness and how hard and how long it takes to get a mine permitted, financed, ordering the material, getting the work going. Like I said before, if you've ever been on one of these large-scale projects, everybody's trying to wreck the project, then get the damn thing up and running, get the bugs worked out. I mean, it's 10 years minimum. So that's why I think we have a longer lasting market that goes higher than people think. I have no idea how high it's going to go. No one does. So I don't like speculating on these things. I'm just saying that, I think we're in a bull market. And I think that, we're only in the, top of the first inning, obviously, but, and you haven't missed anything. And yet, shout out to the guy who sent me the call or the comment or email asking already, when am I going to sell? Not for a long time. Like I said, the market cap of this industry is still probably around $9 or $10 billion. And at the top of the peak of the last bull market in uranium, it was 140, 130, 140 billion. The big money can't even get into this thing yet. And when they do, the first thing they're going to be buying is Cameco, just because it's a large cap. Forget about it. If you think that a big pension fund or hedge fund or family office is going to come in and buy, millions of shares of Western Uranium or whatever penny stock you're holding, you're severely mistaken. You're seeing the same thing in the gold market now. All of the large cap gold miners are doing very, very well. The intermediates are starting to move, but the juniors, many of them haven't even started moving yet. It's simply a matter of not being able to get large amounts of capital. Now that will eventually happen both in the gold market and the uranium market, but that's a process that takes years. couple years as the market caps expand and you can actually get the money in. You can't get large, if you had $1 billion, Warren Buffett can't get into the uranium market, not in a sufficient quantity that's going to make sense for him to do, because it's a law of large numbers. If he's sitting on $140 billion of cash, he could buy the whole thing and he wouldn't even notice. Well, theoretically. But if he tried to, the price would double, quadruple overnight. You can't do it. So it's a process of the market caps expanding, the perception getting more positive, and the sentiment getting better, and money flow into the stocks, and that takes time. Wanted to point this out. This chart, WuFlu disrupts $6.9 billion of mining output. This is on mining.com. You will note that the number one commodity that's been disrupted vis-a-vis mining, almost 12% of annual production at risk at 21 mines, has been uranium. So it's been the most disrupted commodity due to the WuFlu as far as mining goes. I just thought I'd point that out. I thought this was a pretty cool chart. A lot of people were talking about all these gold mines, but only like 1% of annual production has been shut down. A lot of them are less than 1%. I mean, the next lower than uranium, which that's significant. If you said tomorrow you were going to cut production of anything by 12%, I mean, the price would react, and that's what we've seen. Another thing I wanted to talk about real quick. I'm of two thoughts. I'm going back and forth. I just want to go over this real quick. During the 1929 to 33 depression, unemployment got to 25%, and the stock market declined 75%. During the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, unemployment hit 11% and stocks were down 55%. The stock market dropped 55%. 2020 Great Depression, which is what we're in, this is going to be worse than this as far as unemployment. Unemployment right now currently is 20%. And the reason why you haven't really seen that effect is because it's happened so quickly in the space of a few weeks. The ripple effects, it takes, it's like if a ship going through a channel. It takes a while for the waves from that wake that's being created to move out and crash into the shore. It doesn't just happen instantaneously. The effects, the knock-on effects, the throw a rock into a pond, the ripples, if you will. Yet stocks are down only 12%. I think we're in a bull trap here. Now, I am concerned. Why? As some people have said, and somebody dubbed it this, Project Zimbabwe is going on. Look at the amount of money creation by central banks recently. This is just in the last 2020 here. It's been a rocket ship straight up. But you had a lot of money creation in 2008, 2009, and yet, as I said, the stock market went down 55%. I think we're due to go down quite a bit more. I think that we had an initial drop very quickly in the markets. When we said we're going to shut the economy down, the market dropped about 35% in a month. We had a snapback rally. And now I think that, as earnings start coming in, people start realizing, what's United Airlines going to look like when they say, we don't have any business? Who's going to buy the stock? Now, people say, people are anticipating this V-shaped recovery. And I just don't see it happening. It's not going to happen. So this is very important to look at. I still think, I'm still sticking to what I've been sticking to. I like gold. Why? Well, because last time the central banks printed a lot of money, gold made an all-time high to 1900, and we're doing the same thing now. So I'm anticipating gold to make a new high again. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen next week, but I do anticipate it happening, and especially I think it's going to accelerate its move higher in conjunction with a decrease in the stock market. I believe the market's going to be heading lower, regardless of the amount of money printing. That's my view. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this week. There's a lot of guys on Twitter that are very smart on uranium. You should get on there. I already mentioned Brandon Monroe. Crux Investor does a lot of good interviews with a lot of smart guys. Uranium Insider. I was actually looking for it. I'll try to find it and put it in the show links. But him, I think Andrew from Smith Weekly, and somebody else, they did an after action report of the Cameco conference call, which I have not been able to find. I don't know if it was recorded. I hope it was, but I'm not sure if it was. I'd like to hear that. So what I'm trying to tell you is I'm a generalist. I don't deep dive any of these industries. I know enough of them to get confident in deploying money in them. But I'm not an expert like some of these other people are. You know, if you want to be an expert on tankers, follow Jay Mintzmeyer on Seeking Alpha. He's probably one of the smartest guys. Follow Cuppy on that. Okay. Uranium, I just mentioned the guys. You know, gold. You know, that's something I spend a lot of time on. So I know more than the average bear, but I'm not the expert. I'm not just going to sit here and go on about supply and demand. Look, I believe we're in a bull market. It was a matter of time. I think that this catalyst of the supply being constricted because of the WuFlu has been the catalyst now to get the unanticipated supply disruption that we needed to really wake people up. And I think now we're seeing uranium move higher. I think it was $33.75 this week. We're moving higher week to week, so that's positive. We'll just have to see if it sticks and continues, or if it comes back, you know, as this flu goes away and people get back to work, if the price, you know, moves back lower. I don't think it will, but it remains to be seen. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Again, I want to do a shout out about the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter. If you like these videos, if you want to understand how I translate these ideas into actionable investments or speculations, I'll put a link in the show notes and you can check it out. We also have a Patreon channel. You can get, if you contribute to the Patreon, $5 a month, I will send you the current month stock pick, a one-time deal. You don't get the newsletter every month, but you'll get the one, so you can get a flavor of our writing, and then you can cancel that Patreon support at any time. So those are two ways that you can participate. If you enjoy my videos and just like listen to me blabber on, another thing you can do to help me is to follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, and subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. It helps the algorithm pass this videos on to people that may be interested. These are things that help us gather more interested parties. And the channel has been growing, and I thank you guys because it's all about you and you coming back week to week. So thanks for that. All right, talk to you next week.